Part 103. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1036. Kukan is a small city with a population of less than 10,000 people. In fact, it is only in the past few decades that listeners have chosen this place as their hometown. After all, in the past 200 years, batches of listeners have coming to this world is basically like being chased and killed by local indigenous strongmen. It is only after the balance of power between the two sides has deviated and destroyed that the audience can truly start to have a place to stay. Nowadays, as the last group of indigenous people in the world who can form an organized peak power have been defeated, for most of the audience, it is time to let the horse go to the South Mountain. They can have at least hundreds of years to think, live, and enjoy, and usher in their own good life in the true sense of the word. They no longer have to worry about the number of enemies that must be completed and are broadcast every once in a while. Once again, I went for a sneak attack and hummed hard. A quiet, comfortable, and unrestrained life is coming. If they want, they can even create a religion, or even establish a country or political power in their own name. When the broadcasters really move here, they will not be able to continue to have this unrestrained life, and they will become as low-key as they used to be in the reality of their own world. But when they think about it, they only need to be a little low-key to enjoy the land for hundreds of years. The free and unrestrained days of gods are already a paradise-like treatment for listeners whose average lifespan is equivalent to that of a human cicada. Ordinary people in Kukan don't know who controls the city, but they are serving the lives of the listeners here. Whether it's women, food, or other various needs, the listeners can be here. Get what you need. Of course, there is no internet in this world, but even the life of an ancient prince is enough to make the audience comfortable. At this moment, an Eastern man and a Western man are sitting in front of the chessboard, playing a game of Chinese chess. The two sides are fighting inextricably. Basically, the winner can hardly be determined in the final game. After all, the wisdom of the two people and computing power are too much beyond the limits of ordinary people. Taking one step at a time and looking at two steps is really too childish for them. But they prefer this kind of game. The status of these two people in Kukan is also very high. After all, they belong to the audience of Lizzie's group. Now there are less than 10 people in that group. For the latest group of people who came, from the perspective of the audience, they are undoubtedly older and can gain some respect. But now that the world is settled, they are the most leisurely type, unlike the latest group of big guys who have to hunt down the fish that slip through the net for a few points. The Western man lit a cigarette, which was wrapped with locally grown tobacco. At first, he was not in the habit of smoking, but gradually, it became natural and he enjoyed it. He even found some special his tobacco leaves have been improved by himself. It is possible that in this world thousands of years later, legends belonging to him will be spread, such as the father of cigarettes. The radio station should be moving soon, right? Soon. However, at this moment, the ground began to shake, and the entire Kukan began to tremble. The two men stood up together, flew up together, and looked into the distance. A Qin army is marching from a distance. For a time. The sunset is like blood. Fatty sang a few songs in a row and regained his composure. None of the three were hypocritical people. They had seen too many things between life and death and experienced too many things personally, so there was nothing they couldn't let go of. If there was usually a glimmer of hope in the past, everyone would have risked their lives and give it a try, but this time the three of them didn't have the energy to fight for anything, so they could just wait quietly. In the end, there were only 2 cigarettes left. Fatty handed one to Subai and split the other in half, giving them to Buddha and himself. Differential treatment. Subai, who was obviously treated better, took the initiative to joke at this time. "You are the crown prince, so you should." The fat man didn't want to be a loser, so he retorted directly. "Haha." Subai smiled and blew out a smoke ring. "You will be in trouble." It's boring to say this, the fat man shook his head. Although he always claimed to be a loyal fat son of the broadcasting and the broadcasting prince, in fact he did not get any benefits from it. In fact, he only had a good time. I'm addicted to it. Of course, everyone chooses their own path. Fatty clearly knows that his wisest choice is to watch the fire from the other side, but he does not regret at all that he has gotten himself into this situation. People always have to go crazy. To be honest, sometimes Fatty would be a little envious when he saw Sci-fi going crazy and living casually. Who wouldn't want to? Even ordinary people have the urge to see the phone ring after being exhausted from a day's work and not want to pick up the damn job and damn relationships. Okay, there's no need to be sensational. Let's see what the radio shows. Buddha shook the ashes from his cigarette and seemed to be seriously trying to put on a serious face but failed. He shook his head helplessly. 1 o'clock before he died. The emotions can't be brewed. Ha ha ha. Fatty laughed, making him happy. Me too. The sandalwood has been burned to the end, and it seems that only the last trace is left. The three people's eyes are staring at that position together, as if waiting for the final judgment. However, when the sandalwood reached the critical point, it actually paused. 1 second. 10 seconds. 1 minute. Nothing happened. The time should have come, the fat man muttered, and then took the initiative to run under the incense stick and look at it. Damn it, it's still burning, it's not extinguished, but it can't be finished. Buddha and Sudbai also stood up together. They walked to the sandalwood and looked at the sandalwood that had only the last trace left but was still burning. Does this mean that the other side succeeded? Buddha asked. Kilu and Fusu are done. Probably. The fat man scratched his head again. In that case, how should we get out? The main mission of the broadcast has been announced. Although the incense is still burning, how should we get out? Broadcasting is a carrier of rules. It seems to be above the rules, but in fact it is the rules that control the operation. Therefore, even if Fusu and Monk really succeed, the main task of broadcasting is the main task, which can make the incense continue to burn, but it was impossible to release Sudbai and Fatty Buddha without any reason, against the rules of the main mission that he had customized before, and without any principles. Radio cannot do anything inconsistent. In this case, we can at least be sure that the broadcaster is not playing tricks on us. Anyway, we are ready for 3 people to die together, or one of them is randomly selected to die. So at this time, the broadcaster will borrow the sandalwood permanent burning bug to finally. It's meaningless to tease us and make us kill each other, Sudbai analyzed. Then let's take a gamble. Either me or Fatty, you and Buddha, one of the two parties must be clones. The fat man pondered for a moment and finally understood what Sudbai meant. Although the 3 of them had no communication with the outside world in the story world, this abnormal sandalwood also ignited everyone's so-called hope for survival, but nothing could be finalized. But the 3 people who were planning to lose everything actually had nothing to bet on. Now, if Fusu is really successful, then the radio should immediately stop the listener destruction plan. We advanced listeners with the best talents will definitely be held in the hands of it like a treasure, Fatty said. When he said the words best talent, his face didn't turn red and his heart didn't beat. So, we can only think that one of us is a clone, but that person doesn't know that he is a clone. Moreover, this story world is likely to have 2 circles, exactly the same circle. For example, in another story scene, there are also 3 of us. That's all I can think of. If the radio doesn't want to kill us, it can only set it up like this. Even if it doesn't set it up like this at the beginning, in order to remedy it and prevent us from dying, it will still follow our ideas. Expand. At worst, after this time, we can instill some memory images into the other side, which will complete its story world. Buddha said. Then, the last question, how do we judge which party is the clone? You know, if this factor was taken into account in the setting of the broadcast at the beginning, then it is very likely that there will be two batches of the three of us in the two stories. We have to make a choice, which party to kill, Fatty asked doubtfully. If both story worlds choose to kill the same group of people, then no matter how the broadcast tries to remedy it, one of us must die, even if the broadcast doesn't want us anymore. Die. Subai threw the cigarette butt on the ground and said to the fat man, "Fat man, do you have any coins on you?" "Toss a coin." The fat man was stunned for a moment and then immediately understood what Subai meant. He immediately took out an ancient coin from his pocket and said, "Heads will kill you Dabai, tails you will kill us both." Subai nodded in agreement, and Buddha on the side also agreed. "Actually, there's really not much pressure," Fatty said to himself. Tossing a coin is generally about luck, especially when Fatty throws it casually without any calculation or trickery. It just depends on luck. In the story world, looking at luck is actually equivalent to the mood of watching a radio broadcast, but in this form, the radio tells you and others who to kill. "Life or death is a matter of fate," the fat man shouted low and threw the coins in his hand into the air. The coins flipped continuously in the air. Finally it fell to the ground. "It's the front." Subai smiled slightly, motioned for the fat man to start with Buddha, and said at the same time, "I try my best to minimize my vitality, otherwise I'm afraid you will kill too hard." The fat man, who was a little embarrassed at first, suddenly had the urge to punch the guy in front of him. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1037. After the white light dissipated, Subai found himself standing at the corner of the highway. Another scene appeared in his memory, that is, the result of tossing the coin was reversed, and he was the one who killed Buddha and the fat man. However, Subai still clearly remembered the scene of Fatty and Lord Buddha spending a lot of money to kill him, so he didn't find it a bit funny. Sometimes, broadcasting is really like a bureaucrat who is obsessed with saving face. It will not admit its mistakes or give up. Everything it does is to maintain its own system and face. For example, this time, is it really the difference between clones and non-clones? Broadcasting had previously pulled me, Fatty and Buddha into the story world. What its purpose was, had actually been revealed for a long time. It was just that I and others were determined to stand against it, so it also tore off its original integrity, and so-called the fun creates such a monotonous story world with no freshness and only an obvious meaning of revenge. Fortunately, it lost this round. The broadcaster would actually lose, fall into disadvantage and passivity, and even do things that would slap him in the face. In the past, Subai would be surprised, but now, it feels normal. In the past, the omniscient and omnipotent broadcaster was like a god who could not eat the fireworks in the eyes of ordinary people. But once he connected with his cheap parents who had been integrated into it, he undoubtedly became much more down-to-earth. Of course, the down-to-earth atmosphere here can be it's not a compliment. Subai touched his pocket and saw that his cell phone was broken. The cigarette had already dispersed in the story world. Now he had almost nothing except this windbreaker. He started walking, slowly at first. However, just when Subai was about to speed up, a truck with a Sichuan license plate stopped beside him. "Dude, do you want a ride?" Subai just got into the car. Logically speaking, Subai was actually much faster than driving, but he didn't want to rush to the small temple in such a hurry. He didn't have the intention to join Fatty and the others as soon as possible to share the so-called joy of successfully cheating the broadcast. Of course, in Subai's view, the monk and Xiazhen should take the greatest credit for the success of this matter. Subai didn't know about Fugui yet. He now guessed that Fusu had taken over Jizhen's body and sent out the humanoid signal. In short, there really wasn't much to be happy about. In other words, Subai is actually very conflicted now. Xiazhen was forced to become a victim. He knew that neither the monk nor Fusu would give Xiazhen a real chance to choose. Therefore, Xiazhen was not a martyr, but a martyr. Of course, Subai would not to struggle with this kind of thing. The world of the audience is either you die or I live. Fortunately, with Fatty Buddha and the others, the final decision of the three people in the world just now was a little tender. At least it can make people believe that we have lived together for a long time and have been dating for such a long time. On top of the entangled interests, there is also a little more luxury. In front of this middle-aged truck driver, Sudbai's melancholy seemed a bit insignificant. He thought that Sudbai was a wanderer, only wearing a loose windbreaker, and his hair and beard looked very long. This was a confused person. Young man, a young man who needs guidance to fight. So, in the next half hour, the truck driver poured several large bowls of chicken soup into Sudbai. Sudbai could only sit in the passenger seat and smile. Firstly, they meant well and let him ride without paying for it. Secondly, if he told him about his affairs, they might think that he was crazy. However, this feeling of being taught and cared for by an older person seems to have lasted for a long time. My aunt was originally the elder who cared about her the most, but in the end, her sister, her own mother, borrowed her body and left her to lie on the bed to rot. Perhaps, Lu Menjiao's behavior could only be because she was unwilling. She left traces of her exact existence and actions at that time, so her biological sister became her victim. There is another person, that is Lao Fugui. Sudbai still smiles knowingly when he thinks of the words "I'm so scared" that appeared under his feet when he was about to be taken away. That mysterious but cheerful elder, although he didn't I spent a day with him in a real sense, and he might have died before I was born, but he gave me care that neither my biological parents had ever given me. A person who died a long time ago has become the person closest to him, especially when he was forced to despair by Su Yuhang and Lizzie. He was the one who took the initiative to change the position of guardian to himself. At that time, Sudbai thought that Su Fugui would regain his freedom after leaving the place of enlightenment. However, the fortune that greeted him had indeed disappeared. No matter what form of existence, as long as there was still a glimmer of hope, more than 99% of people would be free. People will choose to do their best to preserve any trace of themselves in this world, but Fugui does not do that. Counting with his fingers, Sudbai recalled one person after another while the enthusiastic driver beside him kept persuading him. In fact, there were really not many people. If you count again, you can add 9 at most. Brother, Sudbai still hasn't been able to find the answer to why Brother Ninth didn't follow the instructions and open the bronze box in front of him. Later, Ninth brother was killed by his compatriot brother as if to vent his anger. The answer to this secret will never be found. Is it because Jixiang has appeared a long time ago? Or was it because Ninth brother felt compassion at that time? Okay, just these 3. Sudbai suddenly laughed again. Because he suddenly discovered that the elders who really cared for him or might have cared for him, all dead. On the contrary, the 2 people who had the most blood relationship and the most similar DNA arrangement and combination when I was a child, held down my head again and again and stuffed myself back into the incubator, are still alive and well, and even have their dreams come true. Became part of the broadcast. So angry. Sudbai laughed, showing his white teeth. That's right, young man, smile more. There are some things, no matter how difficult they are, you can't look away. If you smile more, you can look away. This is the life of a person. The driver thought that his persuasion worked and made him more motivated to save Sudbai, a down-and-out young man. In Sudbai, he seemed to see himself who had been frustrated and lost. While talking, the driver actually played Sailor by Zhang Zihua in the car. This surprised Sudbai and shook his head helplessly. This kind brother actually even used the BGM. At this moment, a white car that was originally driving in the leftmost lane suddenly changed lanes to the right without turning on its lights, as if the driver was asleep or doing other things. The vehicle cut in diagonally without any reaction time. The driver subconsciously turned the steering wheel to prevent himself from hurling directly, which made Subai slightly surprised. Generally speaking, what drivers are most afraid of are large truck drivers, because once something happens, some experienced truck drivers would rather fight directly than turn the steering wheel or slam on the brakes. Because of its high chassis, it is safe in normal collisions. However, if you try to brake suddenly or avoid it, the huge inertia will cause the truck to roll over. As expected this time, the truck tilted directly over and was about to hit the guardrail on one side. Subai shook his head, his eyes focused, and the truck immediately stopped steadily, without even the slightest shaking of the body. Hoo-hoo, 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 hoo-hoo. The driver, who had just been giving Subai a life education lesson, was so frightened that his hands were shaking and he was looking straight ahead. When he came to his senses, he found that the young man sitting in the passenger seat was no longer there. "No, when it's gone." Here, in fact, it was not far from the small temple. Subai took out a cigarette that came from the driver, lit it, and took a deep breath. In fact, it was the driver who was lucky enough to catch up with the broadcast because he carried out the listener destruction plan. Therefore, I will not continue to absorb the experiencer's time period. Otherwise, if I had saved him like this before, I would have caused him to experience something more terrifying than death. If he just yelled when he saw an injustice on the road, it would be fine, similar to how he saved the firefighter. But just because this guy had sex with me in the car for so long, some cause and effect might arise. The small temple was right in front. Subai saw the monk sitting cross-legged at the door, and the monk also saw Subai. "Monk, where are you admiring the moon?" Subai walked up while smiling. "The weather is bad tonight, the night sky is completely dark, and there are no stars or moon at all. Amitabha." The monk put his hands together and recited the Buddha's name. "Of course, the moonlight is beautiful tonight. Are you feeling enlightened again?" Subai could only think so, otherwise the monk would not have said such nonsense. The monk stood up and walked back side by side with Subai. Subai turned back and glanced at the orphanage in the distance, which was still shrouded in a black mist. Turning around, Subai asked the monk as he walked, "Ji Zhen is dead? How did he succeed? By the way, where are Fatty and Buddha? Are they back?" In the small temple, there was a formation that Fatty and the monk had set up before, and it had also been modified and blessed by Chen Ryu, so Subai could not scan the situation in the small temple with his mental power. The monk still smiled and said nothing. Subai was a little confused and secretly wondered what the monk was doing. When he pushed open the floor-to-ceiling window of the living room and walked in, Subai was stunned. Among the blankets in the living room, a baby with white and tender skin as delicate as porcelain crawled out excitedly from the care of two black cats, Jixiang and Ruyi. A pair of small hands and a pair of small feet crawled desperately on the floor, trying hard to raise their heads, raising their necks high as if they were afraid that the person in front of them would disappear if they were not paying attention. "Daddy, Daddy, hug." Subai felt that his heartbeat had stopped at this moment. Yes. The monk is right. Tonight's moon. Very beautiful. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1038. It's been a long time since I posted a single chapter asking for monthly votes, and I haven't competed for monthly votes for a long time. I went back and took a look. In August 2016, Long posted a single chapter saying that Terror Broadcast would no longer ask for monthly votes and rewards. Then, Long wrote the book quietly, and everyone read it quietly. However, this time the dragon is going to break his promise. Everyone should be aware of the turmoil that took place more than a month ago. 3 of Long's other books were banned, Terror Broadcast was also on the verge of collapse, and even the monthly pass was locked to zero. During that time, many readers may have been worried that the broadcast would be gone when they woke up. As an author, Long spent a very anxious month. At that time, when he first started typing, it was difficult to concentrate because you couldn't even be sure that your book would be there tomorrow, and you began to wonder if you were still staying up late today. Does what you write still make sense? Books are an author's fate. It may be an exaggeration to say that, but for Long himself, books are more like his own life. Daily coding has become a living habit, his own career, and his own existence. The cornerstone of a sense of achievement and achievement. The anxiety during that period cannot be described in words. Long once told a friend that he would have collapsed more than a year ago, just like the original horror net ended up being unfinished. Same. But to be honest, writing a book quietly for more than a year, fighting for nothing and asking for nothing, was indeed very tempering. Long himself was a little surprised that he survived. Then he wrote about Boss Liang becoming a gay friend in anger, and also wrote about the final ending of Lao Fuegui. The day before yesterday, after posting the chapter about wealth and honor, I saw everyone saying respect for wealth in the chapter barrage and book review area. Seeing everyone's enthusiastic response, Long felt a great sense of satisfaction in his heart. Long has never dared to call himself a writer. Long has always positioned himself as an ancient storyteller. After telling a story, the audience roaring with applause can often bring great pride and honor, proving himself good at eating. Of course, the copper plates and broken silver that the officials threw on the table were also a source of happiness. This time's turmoil can be regarded as the rebirth of Terror Broadcast. Moreover, Terror Broadcast has indeed entered the final stage. As a book that has accompanied Long himself and everyone for more than a year, Long hopes to be in it at the end. Let it go lively. 2 years ago, an author friend asked Long, "Are all readers of dark literature so die-hard? This book is perverted, and so are the readers, but it is so hardcore that you have so many rewards and monthly tickets." When Long first wrote horror internet articles, it was in the science fiction category at that time, but the monthly ticket sales could surpass those books whose subscriptions were twice as high as his own. At that time, Long remembered that there was a reward list at Kidian. Long then sometimes they are often at the top of the category. More than a year has passed since the last time I competed for monthly tickets. For more than a year, Long has been writing books quietly. Long is very curious about how many readers he has accumulated and how many fans Horror Broadcast has accumulated. To tell the truth, Long's very much looking forward to it. I look forward to what kind of effect this single chapter will have when it is released, and how many more monthly tickets it will generate. Anyway, the last sentence. Dear judges. Dear listeners / The dragon is here to bow to everyone. Everyone. Those who have money support themselves, those who have no money support them, those who are free support them, and those who like them support their love. Hit or not. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 1039. Buddha and Fatty were not in the small temple. They were teleported back to the small temple directly after they came out of the story world, so they knew what happened earlier than Subai. The monk stayed to wait for Subai, while the fat man and Buddha went to find a nearby place with good feng shui to build a tomb for the old rich man. Chen Ryu left, and it was indeed inconvenient for her to stay. She left a message for Fatty, saying that she would help Subai open the seal of the place of enlightenment in the near future. Regarding this woman, Subai had no time to talk to her for the time being. It's not to complain, let alone to hate. Under the confusing situation, everyone has the right to make their own choices, but after all, there is only one rich person in this world. The little guy was carried out by Fuegui. Before Fuegui completely dissipated, he entrusted the little guy to Yan Huiyang. Yan Huiyong waited until Fatty and the others came back from the story world before handing the little guy back to Fatty. After that, Yan Huiyong also left. He didn't say what he was going to do, and the fat man didn't ask. In short, the whole thing has actually come to an end. Whether it was the fight in Shijiazhuang or the thousands of miles of running away, it stirred up the hearts of almost all the high-level listeners across the country. But in the end, the matter has come to a staged conclusion. A new situation has begun, and the treatment of all listeners will undoubtedly be improved a lot. Of course, the crisis is just a postponement, and has not really been resolved. However, compared with the listener destruction plan, those awakened Qin troops will eventually be more cute. At least everyone can see the hope of victory. It's not like facing a broadcast. It wants to execute you. You don't even know where it is. You want to resist, but you can't find your enemy. This it is the most painful and despairing thing. Suner prepared some cold cuts, 2 bottles of Maotai, and a black plastic bag for Subai. Inside were bundles of human and underworld coins, labeled Underground Bank. Thank you, Subai said to Suner. After the monk told him the whole story, Subai really needed to do these things. Suner nodded and didn't say anything. She couldn't help Subai much now. She originally planned to travel to Tibet a while ago to gain insights, but she was delayed because of recent events. She is a very strong person. A woman, but she is smart enough to know where she belongs. Picking up the little guy, Subai walked out of the small temple carrying a basket of vegetables and paper money. Jixiang and Ruyi have been following Subai. Jixiang is here to take care of the little guy. In the past, Jixiang didn't follow Subai when Subai was around. But after what happened with the little guy last time, Jixiang is even more nervous about the little guy's safety. If you wish, you will see wealth. The location chosen by Fatty and Lord Buddha is more than 10 kilometers away from the small temple. It is a good place with beautiful mountains and clear waters. When he saw Subai coming, the fat man took the initiative to greet him and pointed to the earthen grave that had just been piled up over there. There was no hat on it. According to the rules, the fat man and Buddha could not do it for him, so Subai had to do it himself. Buddha just nodded to Subai and took the initiative to walk down the mountain with the fat man. Everyone had his own way of paying homage, so at this time they also very wisely gave Subai a separate space. Subai walked to the grave, laid out the cold dishes, and stacked the paper money aside. The little guy snuggled next to Subai, looking at the mound in front of him with pure eyes. He didn't speak or cry, just somewhat ignorant, but in this ignorance, there seems to be a touch of sadness brewing. A soul boy is a soul boy. Although he is only a child, his understanding of the warmth and coldness of human nature is clearer than that of ordinary people. He is very cute, but he has always been very sensible and obedient. Jixiang stretched out his paw and pushed Ruyi. Ruyi glanced at Jixiang with some dissatisfaction, but still walked down the mountain with Jixiang. The 2 black cats were temporarily prostrate a little further away. There was nothing in Fugui's tomb. In ancient times, those tombs where bodies could not be found were often replaced by burial mounds, but Fugui didn't even leave a single piece of clothing. Subai's original plan was to wait for a while to look for traces of wealth, but now it's better, wealth is completely gone, even the last trace has been erased, and he took the initiative to erase it. Subai opened the mutai, took a sip, and then poured some more towards the tombstone in front of him. Uncle Fugui, this is the first drink we have had together, Subai said. In the past, Subai accompanied the monk and a group of local veterans from Yunnan to explore the place of enlightenment. At that time, he and his group were like a group of rookies who entered a dungeon that was not accessible to their own level. As a result, they were killed by Ruyi. There were many of them. When everyone was about to leave in a hurry, they were forcibly detained by Fugui. In those few months, Subai was so discouraged that he even took the initiative to go to hell in search of temptation, or what could be called relief. However, he was accidentally overturned by Su Yuhang's wave of his hand. Turning it out was like saving his life in disguise. Thinking about it now, at that time, living every day on the essence of corpse energy flowing out of the coffin was the rarest quiet and leisure time since becoming an audience. Now if Subai is allowed to think about and choose, if he can take the little guy there with him. Wealth is still lying in the coffin. The little guy leaned on his legs. He leaned against the coffin. Talk to Fugui every day, and then take the little one for a walk by the yellow spring. It seems that the days can pass so comfortably. The birth of the little guy and his experience make him completely different from other children. He comes from the demon cave, and he also took the initiative to crawl into the demon cave in order to save himself, so the boring place of enlightenment may be boring for the little guy. It's nothing. Subai recalled that when he was in the place of enlightenment, after he had calmed down after the initial period of anxiety and confusion, what he did most every day was to talk to Fugui, although he basically talked to himself. Even if you get a lot of wealth, you may not even say a word in reply. Thinking about it now, maybe for the rich man at that time, it was also a kind of enjoyment for him to lie in the coffin and listen to himself chattering to himself next to him, just like the little guy clinging to him now, then it is a kind of silent satisfaction. Subai didn't shed a tear. From beginning to end, he didn't shed a single tear. His eyes didn't even turn red at all. To be honest, there wasn't much sadness in his heart. Because wealth are easy and natural, he successfully calculated the past and present, arranged his life and death, and was free and easy, free and natural, and successfully completed his revenge on Su Yuhang 20 years after his death. There is nothing to be sad about. According to the secular view, Fugui should be considered a happy and sad person this time. Subai lit the paper money and burned them one by one in front of Fugui's tomb. In the distance, he could vaguely see the lights here, like a dim light in the middle of the night. The little guy watched the flames rolling continuously, and the firelight illuminated his face, making him look extremely agile. "This is your godson, have you seen it?" Subai smiled and reached out to touch the little guy's head. "Call Grandpa." The little guy looked at Subai and then at the tombstone in front of him. Then he opened his mouth very hard and tried to imitate the mouth shape. He knew that this moment was very serious and he must be obedient and good. Moreover, he was right, the old man who picked him up from the cradle and woke him up also had a strange sense of intimacy. Yeah. The little guy worked hard, but he still can't speak. Even though it has been 2 or 3 years since Subai took him out of the story world, he still hasn't grown up. Fatty said it was because the spiritual energy in the real world was too thin. If the little guy were placed in the pre-Qin period, although the little guy might grow slower than ordinary children, it would never be that much slower. Subai didn't care much about this. Whether he grew up, he would take care of him for the rest of his life. When he grew up, he also had the troubles of growing up. Fortunately, the broadcast could no longer absorb experiencers, so the little guy he was worried about before would not. You can completely let go of the matter of entering radio and becoming a listener. The paper money was burning. Subai didn't know if there was a special place for the undead in this endless world of the vast universe, but he probably didn't have one. Even if there was, wealth couldn't be in it. The one where Su Yuhang was held accountable more than 20 years ago completely killed Fugui. After that, Fugui gave up the opportunity to be reborn for himself, and once put on armor, he completely ruined himself in this world. The last trace in the world. He has no soul, and it is impossible for him to enter reincarnation again. He is a completely erased person. After the paper money was burned, Subai shook it in the ashes with his hand to burn out the unburned paper money as much as possible. At last, he took out 3 wine glasses from the basket. They were all filled and placed in front of Fugui's grave. Immediately afterwards, Subai stood up, and while holding the little guy, he used his right hand to dig out a mud hat in a nearby mud field, which was the top of the earthen grave in rural cemeteries. According to custom, every time when offering sacrifices to ancestors, the old hat must be removed, and after the sacrifice is completed, a new piece of earth must be dug out and put on top. Sudbai carefully put the clay hat away, then squatted down in front of the grave again, and raised his wine glass. The first cup is a toast to the past. Wow! Drinks were spilled on the grave. Sudbai raised the second cup, smiled and said, "The second cup is for the next life. You are my godfather in this life. If we have another life, we can actually change it. As your godfather, I have to pay you back the debt I owe you. It's a pity. When I realize that I owe you a lot, but you have been dead for 20 years, what do you think this is?" Sudbai raised his third glass of wine. "Third cup, here's to wealth and honor. You must be lonely down there alone. Just wait. In a few years, I will send your friend Suyuhang down to accompany you, or I will go down to accompany you. In short, you will not be alone for too long." In the dark night, Sudbai's eyes seemed a little blurry. He seemed to see a middle-aged bald figure with a big belly standing next to the grave. He still smiled honestly, looking at himself and the little guy beside him. "Live in. The more children you have, the more blessing you have. That means wealth." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1040. "Haha, let's talk to Dabai later. I'm going back to Chengdu," the fat man said to the Buddha next to him while smoking a cigarette. "What are you going to do?" Buddha asked. "Take care of those women who have lost their feet, they are also pitiful people." The fat man looked pitiful. "Hey, this matter is over for now, we have to relax, knowing that you won't go, let alone the monk. Dabai has a damn cold personality, so I can only bear this burden myself, fatty." Okay, go ahead." Lord Fo was too lazy to waste time talking to this guy about this kind of thing. Over there, Sudbai had finished the memorial ceremony and came down with the little guy in his arms. Ruyi took Sudbai's place and crawled alone in front of Fugui's grave. Jixiang hesitated for a moment, then turned around and continued to accompany Ruyi. Went. The relationship between Ruyi and Fugui is actually the most real. Back then, Jixiang was tricked and taken away from the place of enlightenment by Suyuhang. Ruyi still stayed there alone, and then met Fugui, and they depended on each other in the place of enlightenment. For more than 20 years. Sudbai never figured out why Fugui wanted to kill those Western listeners who crossed the border. Perhaps combined with Ruyi's reaction to the curious baby hills when he crossed over, we can draw a conjecture that Fugui just wanted to tease Ruyi. So accompanying Ruyi to kill one by one is equivalent to a certain festival or program that is fixed every year. Others only played with cats by rubbing their hair and combing their hair, but Fugui used Ruyi to kill people, and the person he killed was the guardian of the Western Enlightenment place. There is no way of knowing whether this speculation is accurate or not. Ruyi and Jixiang are very similar in that they will not say anything they don't want to say anyway. After returning to the small temple, Sudbai took a shower and then lay on the bed, hugging his son. After lying down for a while, Sudbai looked at the ceiling and didn't sleep. The little guy may have slept in the orphanage for too long, so he didn't feel much sleepiness just after waking up. Father and son just lay together like this. In the second half of the night, the little guy got a little sleepy. He curled up in Sudbai's arms and finally fell asleep. Sudbai was no longer sleepy. He lowered his head and looked at Xiaojia's cute face, with the corners of his mouth showing. A smile. Meow. Jixiang stayed with Ruyi until late at night, when it finally came back. Like Sudbai, Jixiang had been separated from the little guy for too long, so Jixiang jumped on the bed at this time and crawled down directly next to the little guy. The tail stroked the little guy's back from time to time, as if to soothe him to sleep more comfortably. The place where Fugui's bones were buried more than 20 years ago was the location where Li Qi chose to build an orphanage. It is obviously impossible to say that there is no connection between the two. There must be something inevitable in such a bizarre coincidence. But it is currently unknown whether Fugui saw through the future and made plans, or whether Li Qi also learned some of the information and deliberately cooperated. Subai slowly closed his eyes and relaxed his body slowly. Tip of the nose. The faint aroma of milk from the little guy is still lingering. Subai finally fell asleep. The next morning, Subai opened his eyes. The little guy had woken up a long time ago. When Subai opened his eyes and looked at him, he found that the little guy was also looking at him with his eyes open. He stretched out his hand and rubbed the little guy's head, and then patted the little guy's hand. "Excellent ass," Subai said with a smile. "Get up when you wake up. Let's have dinner together at noon today." This is what the monk said in advance yesterday, that is, everyone finally got together again, and the little one is back, so let's have a good meal together at noon. The little guy immediately crawled to the end of the bed. He was wearing a cartoon baby outfit with a crotchless bottom, and he looked very cute when he climbed up. Jixiang had been waiting nearby for a long time. He bit the little guy's clothes out of habit and carried the little guy to the bathroom. Life seemed to be back to what it was before. Everyone seemed to still be living in Lao Fang's house, which made Subai feel like he was in a trance. Perhaps because of the rich affairs and the little guy's return, I have become a little sentimental now. Subai could only think so. After Jixiang took the little guy to wash up, Subai went into the bathroom and took a shower. When he came out, the monk had already prepared a table of vegetarian dishes, and he also specially made some exquisite snacks for the little guy. The monk's vegetarian meal still has a reputation, even fat people who are not fond of meat also like to eat it. Thinking of Fatty, Subai looked around and asked, "Where is Fatty?" "The front foot just came back and is sleeping in the house," the monk replied. "Damn, who missed me?" The fat man walked out sleepily, carrying 2 big bags in his hands. He opened them in front of the little guy. They were full of toys and comic books, and there was also a flat. "Come on, fat uncle, how are you?" The fat man picked up the little guy and gave him a kiss. When the 4 of them lived in Lao Fang's house before, the fat man was the closest to the little guy, and he often played with the little guy. Most of the guy's toys and comics were also bought by Fatty. It's also hard for the fat man. When he went to care for the woman who had lost his footing at night, he actually didn't forget to buy toys for the little one. Subai once heard Ying Ying laugh and talk about it. She said that a man who has an affair outside is not necessarily a bad man, but while he is with a woman, no matter how bad a man is when he is having an affair while worrying about his children's homework at home, he can't be any worse. "Sit down," the monk gestured. "There is also a soup." The poor monk picked some medicine and stewed a pot of medicinal food. Everyone took their seats, and Sunar was responsible for distributing chopsticks. This meal was quite formal and could be regarded as a kind of reunion dinner. Of course, it also meant to bring an end to all the previous troubles. After the meal, the fat man put the little guy on his neck and took him for a walk. Subai sat alone on a stone chair at the entrance of the small temple. The sun is shining brightly and the wind is gentle, which can be regarded as a rare good weather. "You look very relaxed today. By the way, do you want some tea?" Sunar walked up to Subai and asked. Subai nodded. Sunar turned around and went back to make tea. After a while, she came out with 2 cups of tea and handed one to Subai. "Actually, you shouldn't drink tea just after eating, as it's not good for digestion," Sunar reminded. Subai smiled and said, "Do you still care about this?" "I don't care about digestion, I just remembered that in A Dream of Red Mansions when Lin Daiyu first entered Chia's house, the servants brought tea to the family after dinner. Daiyu thought that her father told her at home that it was not appropriate to drink tea after dinner. But she still drank with everyone. Do you think being here is like Lin Dao entering Jia's house? Subai turned his face and looked at Sunur. Sunur also looked at Subai calmly. It's not that exaggerated, but it's about the same. I'm here. Apart from doing some housework, I can't help with anything else. Subai nodded slightly and said nothing more. He knew that Sunur did not need his own comfort, and there was indeed no need to comfort him. There was no need for too many polite words among the audience. I am already a senior, Sunur said. I feel it. Actually, being with you all day long is not without its benefits. Other ordinary listeners don't have the opportunity like me to see so many high-level listeners, or even big guys, up close. Are you making fun of yourself? No, sincerely. If you want to stay, just stay. No one will say anything to you. I know. You can go to Buddha to ask for advice on some cultivation matters. Your strengthening route is very similar to his. The fat man's and the monk's routes are different from yours, and mine is even different. Now that the broadcast has begun to live frugally, it cannot absorb any more new experiencers. So generally speaking, the danger factor of the story world will also be reduced, and the innocuous causal impact will be reduced, such as seeking help from a higher level audience. Yasuner nodded. Okay, I'm not that sentimental, but I have to go back to Shanghai soon. Meeting my family, Subai took a sip of tea. Now that I'm so close to my family, it shouldn't be as serious as before. Chu Zhao's May 7th is coming. Subai fell silent and said nothing more. He forgot. Not only had he forgotten this matter, he had almost forgotten Chu Zhao as a person. The teapot is here, you can add water yourself. After saying that, Sunur turned and walked back to the small temple. Subai sat on the stone chair, putting a hand on his chin and rubbing it quietly. Subai didn't feel too guilty because he forgot Chu Zhao's Memorial Day. What he was thinking about was the scene between himself and Chu Zhao after he became the audience. There are objective reasons and subjective reasons. But the biggest reason is that he doesn't really regard Chu Zhao as his friend. At this point, he seems to have inherited some of Su Yuhang's genes. Without continuing to think deeply about this matter for a long time, Subai stood up. He felt a little helpless and irritable. His own realm had disappeared because of his previous willfulness in Shijiazhuang, and the original opportunity to advance had disappeared. Now he wanted to regain it. It will be much more difficult to advance to a high level than before. Although radio broadcasts will broaden the treatment of listeners, the main theme is early preaching. This fact has not changed. At this moment, Subai suddenly felt a huge momentum rising from the east of him. At the same time, like a competition, there was also a terrifying momentum rising from the west. Maybe it was because the distance to the west was relatively far. So the perception is slightly blurry. Subai was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized. The monk's figure appeared next to Subai when the two momentums rose, and said. One in the east, one in the west, and two more enlightened ones appeared. Almost, at the same time Subai smiled, time waits for us not. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1041. There were people in the east and the west preaching the truth at the same time. This was a big event, and its impact was great, but it seemed to happen in heaven. For other listeners on the earth, it was too far away, and it did not have any impact on everyone. How much impact life has had, at most, it makes those high-level listeners more anxious. After all, they are also in the realm of enlightenment in the next step. A new round of war preparations has begun. Subai can imagine that when the 500 evil stars in that world wake up, and those big bosses are indulging in the resting state of horses are released in Nanshan, who will face those evil stars? What a bloody ending! Even whether Li Ji himself can survive in that world is still unknown. Radio stopped its listener destruction plan and began to protect its remaining audience resources. At least, compared to the current high-level listeners and senior-level listeners, they have entered a honeymoon period. Radio has gone from being hateful and the fearful ghost father began to change into a loving father. However, we have to face what we have to face. No one knows exactly how Alexander taught broadcasting awareness, but what can be guessed is that Alexander should have a deep understanding of broadcasting and make correct judgments about broadcasting. Period of weakness, and at the same time, it was also determined that once the radio implemented the audience destruction plan, it could only choose to stop, but it could not choose to return to its original routine. It is equivalent to waiting until the broadcast cuts off the raw material collection of this world, and then brings the broadcast to an equal position for a final decisive battle. Ever since Fatty went to Chengdu that day to care for a woman who had lost her footing and bought a lot of toys for the little one, Fatty had hardly left the small temple in the past half-month. He spent all day eating and lodging in front of the Sanking statue. According to the monk, the fat man was realizing something. After all, among the four, the monk was the high-level one, Subai and Foye were the middle-level ones, and the fat man was the only one at the bottom. It was impossible to say that he was not in a hurry. This morning, when Subai woke up, he saw the fat man lying on the futon over there at the Sanking statue. The little one was being teased by him on his big belly, and Ji Xiang was basking in the sun next to him. As one wishes. Ruyi is still standing by the grave of old Fugui. It has not come down since Subai held a memorial ceremony for the past half-month. Jixiang occasionally goes up to see it and then comes back. Human beings are indeed incomparable to a beast in many aspects. Subai thought this in his heart, and then saw Ji Xiang, who was lazily basking in the sun, suddenly staring at him. Yo! Did you hear my voice? Subai shook his head and smiled. Ji Xiang prostrated his head again and continued to bask in the sun. He was too lazy to meet Subai. Of course, Subai was just a little kid in front of him before, and he was just a little listener when he grew up. But now, Subai is indeed stronger than himself. For Subai, life in the past half-month seems a bit decadent, but for him, he has indeed experienced enough. First, he had a duel with Lehman, and then went to the west with Chen Ryu. And killed 3 in and 3 out in Shijiazhuang. The trend of advancing was also a natural result of relying on the momentum accumulated from this time of fighting. Right now, the water has been used by him for other purposes, so he needs to find another water source to pour it in. This is not a pure accumulation of energy, but a change in state of mind. Besides, Subai now has no chance to play a killing game with a group of high-level listeners like before, because it is conceivable that the radio will definitely strictly control the listeners now. Between killing and internal friction. "Would you like breakfast?" asked the monk who was sitting at the coffee table enjoying tea. Subai sat down opposite, picked up a piece of steamed bun and started chewing it. "Want to advance in another way?" the monk asked. "You are considered a senior now," Subai teased. "Not necessarily. In fact, I think everyone has their own way." The monk made another pot of tea. "There is no need to change your path at this time. Of course, this is your own choice, and I also know that last time in Shijiazhuang, you squandered all your accumulation. Now you want to climb back to the original road, which is indeed a bit dry and boring. People are like this, and Buddha is also the same. They all want to try new things." Subai nodded, indicating that the monk was right. It's just that there aren't many shortcuts in this world. Some shortcuts may seem like shortcuts, but when you spend too much time searching, analyzing, and going through the bumpy roads, you'll probably find that you're still the same stupid person. This law is more applicable. "Monk, I understand everything you said." Subai took the teacup and took a sip. The sun was shining brightly outside, and he was holding the tea in his hand. He didn't feel cold or worried about money or life. The life was actually quite pleasant. Of the poor monk is just giving you a little reminder. In fact, someone has already walked your path of strengthening. You can continue to follow the path he pointed out to you. At this point, the monk paused. A person who can even delay death and continue to exist, a path that even the accountability of heaven and earth cannot completely erase. To tell the bottom of my heart, the poor monk is a little envious in his heart. Are you talking about the third level of ancient zombie? Subai understood what the monk meant. In fact, what the monk said to him now had no meaningful meaning at all, but it was a bit too strange. Yes, the third level of Gujan. If the poor monk remembers correctly, the first level is body refining, the second level is soul refining, and the third level is God refining. You are still short of the third level. Of course I know this, monk. Are you interested in this? Subai asked. If you want, I can give you a rubbing of the spiritual imprint of this set of exercises. Amitabha the monk shook his head. No, no, the poor monk has no greed for this. The poor monk has achieved the fusion of spirit and wisdom in Buddhism with his ancestor and his previous life. You can say it so beautifully to deceive one's master and destroy one's ancestors. Subai couldn't help but joked with a smile. The monk suddenly fell silent and became a little serious. Subai also stopped smiling at this time. In a daze, the person sitting in front of him was not a monk, but another person, a wise man whose eyes were deeply immersed in the vicissitudes of world affairs. Your godfather is the first person that the poor monk has seen in thousands of years. His path is not easy to follow, because he has given up everything, left everything, and everything is at ease. Therefore, the cause and effect are not touched, and the years not being self-sustaining, to use religious terms, means jumping out of the three realms and not being in the five elements. You are not Kilu, you are Huiguo. Subai dragged his chin with his hands and looked at Kilu in front of him and said. The poor monk is the seven laws and the fruit of benefit. The monk looked solemn. Subai was in awe. He understood that the monk used his eyes and thoughts in his previous life to guide him. Thinking of this, the fat man had been nagging the monk for a long time. Half a month ago in the evening. Is this the reason why I moved directly into the Sanking Memorial Hall and could not come out? The monk has integrated his past life. For example, it is equivalent to the people in his group being middle school students. The monk's previous life Huiguo was a graduate tutor, at least in terms of theoretical knowledge. Although I don't know if the monk's alternation of thoughts to Huiguo has any side effects, but he will definitely pay some bad prices, but the monk still did it. The fat man spent half a month with the Sanking statue, which must have accepted Huiguo's advice. In any case, the monk had good intentions. Specifically, what should be done? Subai asked, correcting his attitude. There are 3,000 avenues in Taoism, which are said to be immeasurable. In fact, the tombstone form in which that existence is based can be regarded as a concrete expression of the Tao. Everyone has the Tao, and everyone can realize the Tao, but most people cannot at their life level reach a height where you can withstand enlightenment. Tao is just a business card, which means that you have separated from the original world to a certain extent and have your own place. In fact, Tao is not superior or inferior, but it depends on how you want to use it and the future. The way of a saint is to educate the world, the way of a monk is to save all sentient beings, and our way is to kill people. Yes, the purpose of enlightenment is to be stronger, and to be stronger is to kill people better, and the purpose of killing is to prevent yourself from being killed. Monk Huiguo said it very straightforwardly. I mean wealth, Subai reminded. You can follow his path, because he has completely paved the way for you. There are only 8 words to enter the world and become immortal. Come out of the world and become immortal. Subai pondered for a moment, then patted the monk on the shoulder. Why does it sound like a fantasy novel? Forget it, monk, come out, I have too many theoretical things here. The monk closed his eyes, and then opened them. There was a hint of exhaustion in his eyes, and he sighed. Not everyone can imitate the old rich man's path. Of course I know that. Let's talk about you. What do you want to do? These 8 words are what the poor monk wants to do. The monk looked at Subai seriously. Become involved in the world, and then detach yourself from the world, walk in the world of mortals as you think, and Gyatso is in the advanced stage. It's different when you're a listener and you progress with your heart. This time, it's not the mortal world that refines you, but you that refine the mortal world. Okay, let me know when you want to do it. Subai waved his hand. Obviously, he was not very interested in this. His family knew their own affairs, and the monk might be able to do that mysterious thing. Things, however, were difficult for him. At his core, he is actually a bit similar to Su Yuhang. He is too selfish and too mean. And the most important thing is that Subai doesn't want to change anything or himself. He cherishes everything about him, including his own. There is really no need to exchange for the collapse and change of many beliefs, including the outlook on life, for the chance of enlightenment. Monk Uiguo said it himself, there are 3,000 avenues, you can just choose another one. As for the old rich man, Subai didn't like him very much. According to his calculating temperament, Su Yuhang should have violently strangled Su Yuhang to death before he tricked him to death. How could he have left Su Yuhang alive and well today? Subai walked out of the living room, and in front of him was the temple dedicated to Sanking. Fat man, have you taken a shower in the past half-month? Subai picked up the little guy from Fat man's belly. Forgot, the fat man replied. Subai was suddenly startled. He suddenly realized that the little guy was not playing on the fat man's belly just now, because the fat man's face turned into the face of Tais Hanglajun, one of the 3 pure ones. Then, Subai looked for the sound and saw the altar. The face of Shang Sanking, who looked like Tais Hanglajun, turned into the face of a fat man. Ah! Unexpectedly. Done. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1042. Hey, Dabai, you are not as good as your son. Your son already knows that it is not me. The fat man on the statue smiled and joked. After speaking, his figure slowly dissipated, and then he regrouped in front of Subai, but this figure looked very blurry. The fat man shrugged helplessly. This figure, the form dissipated again, and his face, which was originally lying on the ground, returned to its original appearance. One chi transforms into 3 pure beings, Subai asked. No, are you mocking God or are you praising me? Fatty laughed and shook his head. Fat master, if I were in that state, I would probably be ready to blow up the radio. Then what is this? After half a month of research, you have developed a more powerful deception method. It's a bit more advanced than blindness. The fat man raised his eyebrows. Let's put it this way, Monk Uiguo, also the previous life of Chi LV, told Fat Master that I should concentrate on comprehending it for a while, and strive to rely on my current cultivation and realm to capture the power of faith that has been inherited and accumulated in Taoism, and then rely on this to integrate into one's own body, improve cultivation, or join Taoism, which will be of great help. Then I looked at these 3 guys here for more than a week, and I didn't even feel it. Fatty pointed at the Sanking statue in front of him and couldn't laugh or cry. Then Fatty, I deeply realized that I really didn't seem to have any Taoism talent. Anyway, these ancestors are not friendly to me and don't regard me as one of their own. After that, I changed my mind. It can be said that Monk Uiguo opened a door for me, but Fatty, I am very talented and can draw inferences from one example. Do you still remember my method of attracting thunder? Dabai, you should know what the essence of the thunder technique is, right? Tell Tiandeo to report. This is what you told me. Yes, it's just to report to Tiandeo. Hee, you have to thank your father for this. Yan Huiyong talked to me and said that he found out through investigation that your father gave your godfather to him more than 20 years ago because he was accountable for it. Damn it, this is humming awesome. Your father's move is too coquettish. Compared with him, Fatty and I are just like a primary school student crying to a teacher. It's too shameful. Then I thought, my ancestors are not close to me. I have been enlightened for more than a week, and my soul and spirit are almost numb from the enlightenment, but I don't feel anything. I might as well just think of myself as an ancestor. Unexpectedly, it's done. But this thing is a bit tiring, and I can't hold on for too long, Fatty. The key is that the life level is not enough. When I reach the intermediate or high level, I will be more skilled and calm. Subai understood what the fat man said. It meant that the fat man disguised himself as a Taoist ancestor such as Sanking. Before, the fat man took the initiative to look for the power of faith accumulated over thousands of years. He couldn't find it. Now I changed my appearance and tried to fake it, only to find that the things I had tried so hard to find before came to my door. It's also interesting. A monk deceives his master and destroys his ancestors, and the fat man is pretty much the same. But it's natural to think about it. The existence of radio and its method of creating some gods and Buddhas as NPC characters in the story world from time to time are simply various beliefs and religions. Natural enemy. Of course, this kind of mysterious thing can only be done by monks and fat people. Listeners in Western religious traditions can also do it, but Sudbai's path is not feasible. You go take a shower, you smell a little bit, Sudbai said with some disgust. Damn, Fatty, I smell a little bit, so you dislike me, Fatty sighed as he saw through your expression, no more love, no more love. Having said that, the fat man still went back to the house to take a shower. Sudbai reached out and scratched the tip of the little guy's nose. Same for you. He is so stinky, but you still play with him. You can still bear it? The little guy stuck out his tongue at Sudbai, and then put his face against Sudbai's chest. After patting the little guy on the back, Sudbai hugged him and walked out of the small temple. At this time, the father and son took a walk together to bask in the sun. It was really a kind of enjoyment. The more you experience, the more you know what you need and the more you should cherish. Lord Buddha happened to come from a distance at this time. He must have just finished his morning exercises and took a bath in the stream. Morning. Morning. The two simply said hello, and Buddha went in. Sudbai continued to act lazily in front of his daddy. The little guy pointed to the orphanage on the opposite mountain and said something lao wah wah while his two young hands were still making gestures. I know, you slept there. Sudbai sighed a little. The formation left by Lychee is still there, but Lao Fugui can still take action to release the little guy safely. In fact, many times you can understand the importance of strength, but human character is like this. Sometimes you can't help but want to be lazy, leave other miscellaneous thoughts and quietly enjoy this moment. Perhaps, this is how the monk, the fat man, and the Buddha view themselves. That's why the monk asked him to reappear in his past life to enlighten him and show him the way. The fat man should have taken the initiative to ask for it, but the monk had a bit of a hate of iron that cannot be transformed into steel towards him, so he took the initiative to come to him. Talking to oneself is like the organization discovering that there is something wrong with its own ideological situation and needs to be re-educated and saved. At this time, Sudbai's cell phone rang. He took it out and looked at it. It was a video invitation from Hills. The relationship between Sudbai and Hills is really good. When he fought here, Hills gave him a blessing in the West. In addition, the last time he and Chen Ryu went to the West, Hills even kept it for himself. Emil. In the past 20 years, the sharp opposition between the Eastern and Western guardians caused by Lao Fugui's unique habit of sucking and teasing cats has been resolved in his and Hills' generation. Of course, there will not be another generation of guardians. After agreeing to the video call, Subai saw Hills lying on the sofa wearing a black exquisite pajamas in the camera. Looking at his movements, it seemed that he was still trimming his leg hair. The little guy was also looking at the screen, as if he didn't quite understand what the blonde man on the screen was doing. Subai stretched out his hand to block the little guy's sight. This kid was not afraid of irritating his eyes. "Hey, Su, have you missed me? Hey, who is the kid next to you?" "It's so cute." Hill's attention instantly shifted from Subai to the little guy. "God, this is a soul boy. With this skin and temperament, I can feel the aura emanating from him even through the lens of my mobile phone." As he said this, Hills actually swallowed in an exaggerated manner. "He is my son, his name is Su Yukshuan," Subai replied. "Your son?" Hills was stunned for a moment. "Then who is his mother?" "Haha, you are not following the example of Cristiano Ronaldo, who had a child through a secret surrogate, are you?" Subai frowned slightly. The word surrogacy was a bit harsh in his ears. "What's the matter?" Subai asked directly. "If you just want me to admire you trimming your leg hair, I'm sorry, I'm not interested." "How is that possible, Su? I must have something to ask you about. I know some of your affairs, but not completely." "But it should be a great figure from the East who forcibly stopped the radio's listener destruction plan. It was really a generous move. According to your Chinese tradition, we listeners from both the East and the West should erect a monument to him. You almost met him. He was my previous guardian of the Eastern Enlightenment land." Hills was speechless for a moment. "The terrifying guy who killed the guardian of the Western Enlightenment land for 20 years? Someone over there has witnessed the truth?" Subai asked. "Well, don't you have one more girl?" "The one I have here is a nun from Italy. That girl has been an audience member since she was 12 years old. She is not yet 18 years old now. I have seen her once. She is very tender." Hiles then asked, "What about you, when are you going to preach? I see you taking your child for a walk and sunbathing. It feels quite relaxing. You have the nerve to tell me I'm free when you're shaving your legs." "I'm waiting, and you are waiting too." Suhail smiled slightly, moved his face to the screen, lowered his voice and said, "Only we guardians can clearly know the importance of the place of enlightenment to enlightenment. What does it mean to the reader? There are too many treasures and too many conveniences there. I am not in a hurry, I really am not in a hurry. I am even ready to go to the entrance of the enlightenment place the day after tomorrow to see if I can open it." Sealed. Damn it, I felt lifeless there before, but now I still miss the vast expanse of white and the endless tombstones. The instant noodles I eat now are not as delicious as they were when I was at the place of enlightenment. Hiles couldn't help but sigh. Yes, Subai is actually waiting too. He is waiting for the opportunity for the Eastern land of enlightenment to open. He needs to enter there. This is why he seems a little leisurely now. The jade seal of Dian Kingdom, Huanquan, and the tombstones at the bottom of Huanquan are really important. Su, don't worry. When I open the entrance to the place of enlightenment in the West, you can come to the West and enter from my place. Anyway, we are connected inside." Hills winked at Subai and said, this the look on his face was obviously that he wanted to gain some sense of superiority and satisfaction from Subai, who didn't understand the formation. At this moment, Subai found an extra message in WeChat. He zoomed out of the video call and saw that the message came from Chen Ru. This woman, Subai's feelings for her now became very complicated, not angry, but it's a kind of puzzlement. The performance of this woman, who has always been very strong in my eyes in the previous incident, really makes people feel like a personality collapse. Chen Ru's reply was simple. The formation has been opened for you. When Subai saw this message, a smile appeared on his lips and he said at the same time, Hiles, come to China. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1043. What? Before Hills could react, She continued to trim her leg hair carefully, her posture was like that of an elegant lady. The passage to my place of enlightenment has been opened. Subai believed that Chen Ryu would not lie to him about this matter. In fact, Chen Ryu's character collapsed because of this reason. This woman's thinking was chaotic and stubborn, even though she had suddenly rebelled on that matter before. She should indeed be hated by the people on Subai's side, but in fact even the fat man with the smallest mind just smiled when he mentioned her and was too lazy to say anything. Perhaps, there is another big reason, that is, under the background arranged by Lao Fugui, any other person's performance seems to be overshadowed. The overall situation has long been decided, and he and others are nothing more than salted fish of different sizes. Oh! My Su, is it true? Really, Hills was so excited that he couldn't control himself. Even though he was proficient in formations, he was not 100% sure whether he could open the western land of enlightenment, but now Subai directly told him that the matter was done. How could he remain calm? There's no need to joke about this, right? Okay, Su, I'll book a flight right away. Send me your location and I'll come find you right away. After sending his position, Subai closed the video, and then Subai found that the little guy was touching his own leg with one hand, which made Subai feel funny and angry. What kind of hair do you have on your legs? The little guy looked at Subai in confusion, as if he didn't understand what it meant, and why the uncle in the video had black thighs but not his own. He carried the little guy back to the small temple and handed it to Sunur. It happened that the fat man had also taken a bath and walked out. Fat man, come with me to Dolly, Subai said. Dolly, Fatty immediately understood, the place of enlightenment has been opened again. Well, Chen Ruru just sent me a message. Okay, let's go now. The monk and Buddha will look after the house. Amitba, if you want to go, let's go together, the monk said with a smile at this time. He had been to the place of enlightenment. The last time he was with Subai, but that time they were not strong enough and were tortured and killed by Ruyi. After a while, I didn't look up and observe properly. Moreover, nowadays the monk is the one with the highest realm among all people. In theory, enlightenment is a problem that he needs to face. Okay, let's go together, Subai nodded. Instead of driving, everyone chose to walk. In their current state, a journey of several hundred kilometers was nothing, it was just an outing. Sunur did not go with her. She continued to stay in the small temple to digest and absorb the Buddha's instructions to her. Subai tried his best to slow down a little. After all, the little guy was in his arms, and the pressure of traveling fast was great. Subai didn't want anything to happen to the little guy. Therefore, everyone set out in the morning and arrived in Dali in the afternoon. Even though it is already half winter, Dali is still warm during the day. The altitude here is slightly higher and the sun is abundant. However, the temperature difference between day and night is relatively large, so it is not so comfortable at night. Subai once took the little guy on a special trip to Dali, but that trip ended with Subai falling into the place of enlightenment. Of course, the little guy didn't seem to be very interested in going out to play. He does not like to be lively or joyful like other children. More often, he embodies a just right kind of tranquility and liveliness. Chen Ryu had already left. She chose to leave directly without staying to see Subai and others. Also, there was nothing to say when they met again, which added to the embarrassment. It was really unnecessary to meet or not. However, the aura of the magic circle that Chen Ryu deliberately left behind is still very obvious. This time, the entrance to the place of enlightenment is not at the Urhai Lake, but inside Urhai Lake. Everyone stood on the shore of Urhai Lake and looked up. In their field of vision, they could see cyclones that ordinary people could not see rising and falling somewhere on the surface of Urhai Lake. It seems that the broadcaster took a series of measures after suspending the listener destruction plan, otherwise the formation would not have been opened so easily. Fatty analyzed the scene in front of him, but he remembered that Chen Ryu pulled him along in the past. What was the scene like when opening the magic circle? Even for Chen Ryu at that time, it was not an easy task. She also needed someone outside to control the eye of the magic circle to help her come out. But this time, Chen Ryu was actually able to directly open and set up the formation, then waved her sleeves and left directly. Putting aside the extreme that Chen Ryu's formation attainments had also improved by leaps and bounds after her testimony, the only explanation may be that the broadcaster relaxed the verification process. The seal of the land of Tao. Get ready to go down, Buddha said. Haha, Amitba, of course the master invites you first. The monk looked at Sudbai. Sudbai hugged the little guy and walked directly into the lake. There was a layer of membrane around him to block the river water, and he slowly walked down. The protection of high lake is very good. After all, it is equivalent to an inexhaustible mountain of gold and silver, so the underwater fish are also relatively abundant. The little guy is like being taken by his father to the underwater passage of the aquarium, watching the surroundings swimming. The fish swimming back and forth looked very surprised, and they even pointed at the fish and made beep, bab, bab sounds in their mouths. After all, it was a father-son connection. Although the little guy could not speak and could barely walk, Sudbai could still understand what he meant. Sudbai stretched out his hand, and the two fish were caught directly. Sudbai took advantage of the situation and threw them towards the fat man behind him. The fat man took the two fish and was a little puzzled. Your godson wants to take it back to the cat to eat, Sudbai explained. Jixiang was at home with Ruyi and didn't come here. The fat man laughed haha a few times and put the fish in his pocket cooperatively. In fact, everyone knew that Jixiang didn't eat fish, so he didn't want any small dried fish. Jixiang just absorbs the essence of heaven and earth every day. No one has ever seen Jixiang eat human food. This cat is really easy to take care of. It won't eat or drink your food, it won't cause trouble or tear down the house, and it can still babysit your children. Not far ahead, he saw a white circle the size of a manhole cover on the highway. This was the light from the outer formation of the place of enlightenment. Sudbai couldn't help but feel a warm feeling in his heart. At the moment, Sudbai walked into it with the little guy in his arms. When he fell, Sudbai tried his best to control his body shape and landed steadily at the bottom. What hit him was a strong sense of historical vicissitudes. Sudbai closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The place of enlightenment. I'm back. After going around and around, I finally came back here, but things really changed. The little guy also followed Sudbai's example and closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then spit it out. Sudbai smiled and patted the little guy's butt twice, turned around and looked behind him. The monk and the others followed him in. The monk had been here once before, but this was the first time for Fatty and Buddha to enter here, and they seemed more surprised. Sudbai walked directly in and saw 12 coffins arranged on the altar. One of them was where he had been lying for half a year. The little guy was not scared by the gloomy environment. Instead, he seemed very excited. He pointed here and there and had a great time, as if he had been taken to an amusement park. This is a formation. The monk said directly after walking onto the altar. Well, it seems to have teleportation properties. Fatty raised his head and looked above again. After a specific combination and arrangement, it should be able to be stimulated. Sudbai was a little ashamed when he heard this. He didn't know the formation here at first. He didn't notice that the coffin he was sleeping in had such a mysterious function until Hills, a little expert in drilling holes, penetrated it. The fat man and the monk could see these mysteries at a glance. Is Huan Quan ahead? Buddha walked to Sudbai and asked. In fact, everyone had heard Huan Quan's voice for a long time. This is an echo, Sudbai explained, the underworld has been frozen. Sound can be infiltrated. The underworld has flowed for 2,000 years. It is a cycle. We don't know the source or the end, but it keeps alternating in a cycle. Its sound and everything about it have actually infiltrated the entire Enlightenment place. Sure enough, when Subai and others left the altar and came to the steps where the Dian Kingdom's jade seal was previously enshrined and looked down, they could clearly see that the entire yellow spring was stagnant as if frozen. But the sound of the rolling waves is still heard, as if it is still flowing and has never stopped. When he came back and saw Huan Quan again, Subai felt a lot in his heart. He squatted down and the little guy snuggled next to Subai's legs. The fat man stretched himself. Even though Huan Quan didn't move, he still looked shocked. The Buddha sat cross-legged and recited the scriptures silently. This Huan Quan can be corroborated with many places in his scriptures. The monk's eyes were calm and he looked at his feet. He remembered that when he came in, there was an old man holding the jade seal of Dian Kingdom in this place and then it turned into pus. Does it look good? Subai lowered his head and asked the little guy. The little guy nodded, put his index finger in his mouth and bit it gently. Pay attention to hygiene. Subai took out the little guy's fingers. In the front, it seemed that he could still see himself walking into the underworld after giving up on himself. Behind him, it seemed that the bloated guy was still lying in the coffin to help himself every day. A wisp of corpse air. I felt a little depressed in my heart, and looking at the still Huan Quan in front of me, I became even more depressed. Do you want it to move? Subai asked. The little guy clapped his hands. Subai smiled, spread his palms, and said in a deep voice, I'm back. Boom. In an instant, the ice dissipated. The jade seal of the Dian Kingdom flew out from the underworld and landed steadily in Subai's palm, making waves of trembling sounds. Countless wrecks and resentful souls in the underworld screamed, as if celebrating their rebirth, although they themselves knew that they were actually dead long ago. The underworld lies ahead. Rolling again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1044. The car drove into the garage of the villa. Xie got out of the car, and took out a lot of fresh vegetables and meat he had just purchased from the trunk. When he got home, he put on an apron and went directly into the kitchen to start cooking. The boss hasn't come back yet, but Xie will never compromise with his life. He cooks exquisite dishes for himself every day, mixes the best tasting cocktails for himself, irons the suits he wants to wear, and even puts on his pajamas carefully. Choice, he wants to live a refined life, as refined as if the boss is still by his side. Xie has been living like this for more than half a month after returning from Sichuan. He did not think about the development of the situation, nor did he pay attention to the disturbances outside. He even inherited Fusu's legacy and is now in the middle level. The peak state didn't pay much attention to it. This is not the life he wants. A person's life is too boring and boring. He felt like a walking corpse, without a soul, completely hollow. His brain, his body, and even his breathing had lost all meaning. It's better that Fusu is still in his body, so he doesn't have to think, breathe, or do anything, and just look at his life like an outsider. This is a kind of hypocrisy and a disease, quite like those rotten petty bourgeoisie who like to use artificial words to express sorrow in social media. People always have some illusions about the world, and most importantly about themselves, but this time, Ji Zhen has no illusions at all. He does not think that his choice is wrong, but correspondingly, this is the right choice. It didn't make him very happy. Fusu died, leaving a legacy to himself before his death. The old rich man had the last laugh. At the moment he appeared, all the previous troubles and intrigues seemed to have lost their meaning. When you are alone, you don't have to deal with the original person's demands for coffee and steak. You can have more time to be alone, think, and remember. However, it seems that once people think too much, they are prone to problems. But now it seems like there's nothing else to do except daydream. Xie made an appointment with a psychiatrist yesterday. The doctor was very famous in the industry. When Xie talked about his mood and recent feelings, the other party pondered for a moment. Asked, "Sir, have you fallen out of love recently?" This left Xie speechless for a moment. Lost in love? Really? Xie asked himself repeatedly. Exquisite Western food was ready, carefully plated, and opened a bottle of 80-year-old Macallan. He didn't like drinking whiskey very much, and his boss didn't like it either, but for some reason, this was just right now. The spiciness and sense of age can actually make oneself more comfortable. After dinner, clear the table and clean the room. Everything in apple pie order. During this period, it seemed that it was the first time that Xie had forgotten his identity as a listener for such a long time. He felt that he was an ordinary person, a member of all living beings. He wanted to hypnotize himself so that he could forget his troubles, but he didn't do it. He was afraid that when he came back, what he saw would not be the best version of himself. Lie on the bed, cover yourself with a quilt, close your eyes, put on an eye mask, and prepare to fall asleep. He hasn't slept for a long time. His sleep is more of a meditative state. Because of his high mental strength, it doesn't matter if he doesn't sleep for a month, but it has also become a kind of pain for him. When your life level is getting higher and higher, even if you still regard yourself as an ordinary person and don't think about the so-called generation gap between gods and mortals, in fact, you can't drink away your sorrows and you can't really sleep. Killing time, you won't even feel the cold or be bothered by the heat. You don't have the distance of space, nor the feeling of wasted time. Are you really human? You really can't stand it? Just like that, he pretended to be sleeping. When the alarm clock rang at 6:30, Xie opened his eyes. He thought he should have slept, so let's just call it a sleep. He got up, made breakfast for himself, and then went to the flower garden to trim the flowers and grass. He trimmed the flowers as carefully as possible because he wanted to waste all his time. Then, he took the newspaper, poured a glass of ice water and sat on the wicker chair on the balcony to read the newspaper. After reading the newspaper twice, it only took 3 minutes for Xie to recite all the contents in the newspaper, including the advertisement in the middle. He understood that the boss used to like to lie here and read the newspaper. In fact, he was not really reading the newspaper, but enjoying the atmosphere of lying there leisurely while drinking a drink and smelling the fragrance of ink. Put down the newspaper, close your eyes, face the sun, and your eyeballs can feel the warm reddish color. This is a kind of decadence, an exquisite decadence, and a stylish decadence. Just then, the doorbell rang. Ji Zhen stood up, looking a little dazed, then he walked over and opened the door. Standing outside was that familiar figure, with his straight suit, reflective leather shoes and meticulous hairstyle. "What's wrong with you?" Boss Liang asked. Ji Zhen smiled slightly. "You're back." "Well, the radio brought me back, and I know what happened. It's quite interesting that the old rich man made a name for himself." Boss Liang walked into the living room, sat down in his most accustomed seat, and then coughed dryly, which meant that he needed a freshly made cocktail to moisten his throat. Xie went to mix drinks and asked at the same time, "Are you hungry?" "Hungry. What to eat?" "Steak." "Good." Simple communication, just like before. The equality of lifestyles between the two of them no longer requires too many words and basically relies on tacit understanding. Cocktails were served and he was asked to go to the kitchen to fry the steak. The piano music Moonlight was playing in the room, which was quiet and beautiful. Soon, Xie brought the steak over. Boss Liang picked up the knife and fork very gracefully and chewed slowly. Xie knew that his boss had been pretending to live an elegant life. This may be due to his lack of confidence deep in his heart. "It's ready." Boss Liang picked up the napkin and wiped his mouth. "It tastes good." The words "it tastes very good" are meant to allow you to finish your meal with peace of mind. Xie Zhen has long been used to the boss's routine. After clearing the dishes, the boss lay back in his old position and put on the pajamas he had untied and ironed last night. He was as elegant as an aristocratic gentleman in Downton Abbey, except for his authentic British accent. Cavity. Ji Zhen gave the boss a glass of ice water, and the boss nodded and smiled. The two of them were in a tacit understanding, and it seemed that they had returned to their previous lives. Everything that happened in the middle seemed to have never happened at all. Xie Zhen felt that the so-called quiet and good years were nothing more than that. The boss read the newspaper, and Xie Zhen sat on the sofa in the living room and turned on the TV. Normally at this time, he would help the boss manage the permissions of the public account to get some news. Of course, with the launch of the radio listener destruction plan, this matter became "it doesn't make much sense anymore." Who would be able to work as a civil servant with peace of mind when they are already in trouble? The company's information files are not here either. Xie Zhen hasn't been to the company for a long time, so all he can do now is watch TV. He stared at the TV for a while, then glanced at the boss who was reading the newspaper on the balcony. He picked up the orange on the coffee table, peeled it open, and ate a piece. It was a bit sour, but there was sweetness in the sourness. This kind of quietness and peace lasted until the evening. The boss returned to the living room, walked into the bedroom, and said that there was no need to cook dinner. He had no appetite and wanted to have a good rest. Xie Zhen nodded, indicating that he heard it, and then he went to heat up a glass of milk and send it over. The boss is already lying on the bed, looking at the bedside table lamp. He is reading a book. The boss has always firmly believed that reading a book before going to bed can help him sleep later. Even though Xie Zhen knew that the boss had been reading this book for 2 years. That night, Xie Zhen slept well and peacefully. He was even looking forward to tomorrow in his heart, thinking about what breakfast he could make tomorrow. After an uneventful night, in the early morning, the alarm clock rang again at 6 o'clock. Xie Zhen got up, washed up, went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, and then began to set the table. The boss is also getting up and sitting at the dining table, waiting for the day to start. The cooperation between the two people is very skillful. At this moment, a man with disheveled hair and a dirty suit walked into the villa. Yes, it's no wonder that he has a bad image now, because he has been baking in the desert for almost a month. Even if he is you guys, you can't stand this kind of torture and you won't die, but you definitely can't maintain your original graceful demeanor. Fortunately, the radio released itself. Boss Liang did not call or ask anyone in advance. He did not dare to ask about the result because he could feel that the listener destruction plan had ended, but he was not sure. Explain the final outcome. He blocked all news, and with his identity and strength, he wanted to walk quietly alone. It seemed that no one in this world could find him. He was afraid of the cruel outcome. Although he rescued Xie Zhen in front of Su Yuhang, he didn't know what the final result would be. The little detective and his group were not absolutely good birds. It is still unknown whether the kind-hearted people, especially Fu Su, a guy who carries the hatred of his country and his family, can fulfill his promise. Boss Liang silently walked upstairs and gently opened the door. He stood at the door. Then I saw Xie Zhen sitting at the dining table with breakfast. There was another breakfast placed in front of Xie Zhen, as if he had a premonition that he would be back today. Boss Liang smiled. Is this telepathy? He really missed his assistant's skills. Boss, it's Thai breakfast today, aren't you used to it? Xie Zhen asked to the empty table in front of him. Well, let's switch back to Hong Kong style tomorrow. From beginning to end, Xie Zhen didn't seem to notice that the door was opened and there was still a person standing at the door. Seeing this scene, Boss Liang, who was standing by the door, cried again. Horror broadcast is now number 16 on the overall list and number 1 on the fantasy list. Xiao Long thanks everyone for your support. Brothers and sisters who vote, please continue to vote for Long. After all, this month has just started. Don't panic, hug Boss Liang tight. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiao Long. Chapter 1045. In front of him, the underworld was rolling. Thousands of corpses and souls slowly began to salute Subai, who was standing at the top of the altar after venting the mania of reawakening. The jade seal was flying around Subai. It only recognizes Subai, and others can only temporarily borrow its power to bury tombstones when they are enlightened. This was a domineering and majestic scene. Even Fatty felt a little sad when he saw it. He used to pity Subai for being trapped here as a guardian of Lao Shizi, but looking at it now, it doesn't seem that bad. He actually still there is a hint of envy. The little guy kept clapping his little fleshy hands, loving the spectacular scene in front of him. Buddha and the monk looked at each other and smiled slightly. Indeed, with such a place and almost half-owner status as a guardian, Subai's laziness in the previous half-month seemed to have a strong meaning in an instant. Speaking of heroes based on results, Subai took control of this place and came here again. What he could gain was far more than half a month of seclusion. Although neither Buddha nor the monk knew exactly what method Subai chose to achieve enlightenment, they at least understood that Subai should have had some concerns in his heart. As the person involved, Subai didn't have any special feelings about the scene in front of him. He had been here for half a year and had long been accustomed to everything here. In the past, he even found some ancient musical instruments here and used the Blood Shadow clone to formed a band here and played Yellow River Cantata along with the thousands of corpses in the underworld. I didn't notice it before, but now I feel very clear that the nearest road to me seems to have been paved by Fugui. When the guardian of the former place of enlightenment handed over, Subai thought that Fugui wanted to regain his freedom. He pulled himself into the cylinder, and now, he gradually discovered what kind of wealth he had left for himself. How long can we stay here? The fat man looked at Subai. Stay as long as you want. Subai sensed the mental fluctuations coming from the jade seal. Broadcasting should not block any opportunities that can make listeners stronger. If it was the previous broadcast consciousness, it might not be like this such a choice, because the place of enlightenment is his private collection room, but people like Su Yuhang understand art best, but disdain art the most. Even if we have a party here, the radio will probably not say anything. Having a party, the fat man blinked, then immediately shook his head and said, "Forget it, why should we take advantage of others? We can just stay here and have fun." Subai carried the little guy down from the altar and came to the coffin. He found the coffin where he had been lying before, placed the little guy on it, and sat beside him. The monk and the Buddha sat cross-legged facing the underworld and recited scriptures. The authentic underworld in front of them was like placing a grindstone for them to confirm their sutras. They were already eager to try it. The fat man was still wandering around. He was obviously a guest invited by the owner, but he acted more like a thief than a thief. Subai took out a piece of chocolate from his pocket, broke it in half, and started feeding the little guy. The little guy ate a piece and asked for it, but Subai refused. The little guy pouted and looked at Subai aggrievedly. "Eat less. What if you eat too much and get tooth decay?" "Dabai, can we go to the opposite side here?" The fat man, who had been wandering around for a long time, came up to Subai and asked Subai in a low voice. "You mean, the place of enlightenment in the West?" "Yes, it is the place of enlightenment in the West. I remember you told me that you can get there from here, just by relying on this formation, right?" Subai nodded. "Then can I go over there and have a look?" the fat man asked. "It's there, isn't it also available here?" Subai was a little puzzled. Fatty was a very greedy person, but he wasn't greedy for no reason. Pure curiosity, You know, when I was in elementary school, I wrote an essay about wanting to be an explorer when I grow up. Subai stretched out his hand to stop the fat man's nonsense and pointed downward. Okay, you can think about it yourself. Subai really didn't know much about formations. If Fatty wanted to go to the Western Enlightenment land, let him go. Good. The fat man couldn't help but knelt down and began to study the formation here carefully. The little guy turned sideways and looked at the fat man who was groping on the ground, his eyes wide. Fat man, help me look after the child, Subai shouted to the fat man. Got it. The fat man directly took the little guy over and put him next to him. The two of them, one big and one small, were crawling on the ground together. It was just that the fat man was looking for the texture of the formation. The little guy just felt that he was crawling with this fat uncle. It's fun to climb up. Subai entered the coffin, and his body sank directly in, entering the open Sumuru space. He had lived here for half a year. At this time, he felt like revisiting his old place. He slowly closed his eyes. Unlike Buddha and Fatty, he was not in a hurry. He had already found the path he wanted to take, so the sense of urgency was not that strong. Moreover, what he had to do was urgent. If you don't come, now the monk and the Buddha are meditating on their own dharma in front of the underworld. It is not convenient for Subai to tell them, get out of my way and do it first. Unknowingly, Subai fell asleep, probably because he still remembered the feeling of being suppressed by Suyuhang and Lu Menjiao's omnipresent shadow to the point where he had to choose to become a guardian and bury himself. Here, he had given himself peace of mind. Feel. Yes, this is a prison, but it is the safest place you have ever felt, and it is also a place you miss very much. Subai felt that he should take a nap. What woke him up was the vibrating coffin. His body and consciousness quickly emerged, and he pushed open the coffin lid. Subai saw that all 12 coffins were blooming with light. The fat man hugged the little guy and smiled stupidly. It was obvious that he had successfully figured out this formation. The next moment, the fat man's figure disappeared together with the little guy's figure. Soon, Subai raised his head and saw the fat man standing there holding the little guy in the bronze mirror above. Oh, you can really see here. It's more convenient than a video call, and it doesn't require any data traffic. The fat man also raised his head and looked at Subai from the bronze mirror. The little guy was also very curious about his father's appearance in the mirror above his head. Of course he didn't know what it meant to be afraid. After all, he had dared to crawl to the demon cave alone. Fat man, what are you going to do there? Subai didn't believe that Fatty just wanted to satisfy his curiosity and appreciate the tomb style of another culture. Let's do an experiment. Hee, I'm sorry to do it here, but I can try it in other places. By the way, Dabai, you can follow my tips to rearrange the angles of the coffin below, and then instill a little strength into it. Sent over. The fat man seemed to be worried about the little one's safety, so he hoped that Subai would come and take care of the child. Subai readjusted the angle of the coffin according to the fat man's instructions, and then transmitted his own power into the texture in a specific way, and then a suction force was transmitted. Subai did not resist, and only felt a blackness in front of him. And then he appeared in the Western Enlightenment land. Compared with the surging yellow river in the Eastern Enlightenment land, the layout of the Western Enlightenment land is more extreme. Snow is flying all over the sky, and everything is hung with ice spikes. This is a desperate situation, a forbidden area of life, and there was no sound, it seemed very dead. Experiencing the scene in person made Subai somewhat understand why the guardians of the Western Enlightenment place like to be curious babies, because the dead silence here can really make people go crazy, unlike in the East where there are not only cats but also an unknown child. The stagnant flow of the underworld and the strange corpses and souls in the underworld are at least not so lonely. I guess Hills was bored out of his mind at the time, so he dug around to figure it out. The fat man wrapped his own clothes around the little guy and gave the little guy a bronze mirror to hold in his hands to keep warm. At this time, he took the initiative to send the little guy into Sudbai's arms, and then couldn't wait to pull out red threads and arrange them. It seems that Fatty is going to play a big one this time. Sudbai did not rush to ask the fat man what he was going to do. Instead, he sat next to him with the little guy in his arms. Looking around, Sudbai also saw that there were beer and instant noodle buckets in the ice in front of him. It was probably that Hills was there at the beginning. Eat here. Calculating the time, if Hills takes the earliest flight over, he should be able to arrive almost tonight. It is not impossible for Hills to hijack the plane directly if he is in a hurry. Fatty's formation is very big, not that the ostentation is huge. In fact, there are not many magic weapons used to set up the formation. Fatty just carries it with him. Of course, the amount cannot be large, but Sudbai saw Fatty use it more than once. The essence and blood from the tip of his tongue are sprayed on a specific position. This is using his own origin to arrange a formation. With the fat man's stingy and life-saving character, it is already very easy to achieve this step. About an hour later, the pale fat man finally stood up and stretched. "Mom, I'm so tired, fat man, and I'm finally done. Dabai, let me show you a big one." After saying that, the fat man started to perform hand gestures and at the same time recited obscure spells in his mouth. Next moment, due to the formation around the fat man, black winds were pushed out one after another. The style of the fat man's painting also suddenly changed, becoming solemn and solemn, just like the return of the Taoist ancestor. "The soul is back, the soul is back." The fat man kept twisting his body and shouting, which reminded Sudbai of the way those women called for their husbands when they walked to the west entrance before the founding of the People's Republic of China. Soon, the tombstones hanging with ice chips in the university began to tremble one after another. One after another, majestic power is rising. Seeing this scene, Sudbai felt a little lucky. Fortunately, Hills himself was not here now, otherwise he would have fought the fat man directly.